Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Trade Coffee. When all is said and done, and The Simpsons' legacy is tallied up, I think it's clear that Homer Simpson will be considered the show's true lead and most beloved character. And for good reason. While I love the entire Simpsons family and so many of the inhabitants of Springfield, Homer has proved to be its most reliable and elastic character. Not to mention one of the best voice acting performances in the history of television. But when The Simpsons debuted in 1989, it wasn't Homer who had the spotlight and the world's attention. When you look at early marketing material and merchandise for the show, it is completely dominated by Bart Simpson. I wasn't alive when the show debuted, but the Bartman's omnipresence in the late 80s and early 90s was still pretty obvious, even in the early 2000s. For people who didn't actually watch the show, it would probably have been easy to assume that he was the de facto lead of The Simpsons. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I should remind you that in 1998, Time magazine named Bart the 46th most influential person, not of the decade, but of the 20th century. He was the only fictional character on the list. But by season 5, and maybe even earlier, Bart no longer seemed to be the breakout character and started being treated as just another member of the main ensemble cast. So what happened? Why was Bart so huge when the show launched? And in a show that's now lasted 35 seasons, why was his reign as a pop culture phenomenon bigger than even the show itself so short-lived? That's what I wanted to get into this week, but feel free to post your own theories down below.
And now, Portable Bart Mania in Escape from Camp Deadly!
Talking about the early days of The Simpsons means going back to a completely different world when it comes to American animation, especially adult comedy animation. These type of shows are now greenlit all the time, airing everywhere from Fox's aging but still very successful animation domination block, to streamers, to even Freeform now. But back then, it was just taken as a given that airing an animated show in prime time was a terrible idea. None of them had worked since the Flintstones. Cartoons were for kids. No adult sitting down to a night of TV after work would ever want to watch one. Especially on Fox, a fledgling new network that no one really cared about. Plus, it was like taking these strange, crude little animated segments from the mildly successful Tracy Ullman show and trying to build a whole half-hour sitcom out of them. Like, how successful could that really be? Simpsons writer Matt Reese said that basically the entire writing staff assumed the show would be cancelled 6 weeks in. Of course, it wasn't. In fact, it was an instant hit right out of the gate, and a big part of that success could be attributed to how well marketed the show was, with Bart presented as its lead. I'm going to spend most of this video talking about the show itself, but I do think it's probably important to convey the sheer scale of Bartmania, because it was huge. There were the games and the comics and the merchandise, including the official shirts, which sold like crazy, and hundreds, if not thousands, of bootleg shirts, some less tasteful than others. I mean, this Gulf War one is just the most early 90s thing to ever exist. Speaking of the early 90s, 1990 was also the year that gave us Do the Bartman, Bart's novelty rap song featuring backing vocals from Michael Jackson. It managed to get in the top 25 on the charts in the US, but in the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Norway, it hit number 1. But I don't think even that really fully conveys how big of a deal The Simpsons, and specifically Bart, seems to have been at the time. It may seem hilariously quaint now, where Bart's rude slingshot antics feel about as wholesome as Bugs Bunny and apple pie, but the show was pretty controversial for a time. Some parents and teachers really objected to the "I'm Bart Simpson, who the hell are you" line being on kids' shirts, and apparently radio pundits complained about the show all the time. No less than US President George H.W. Bush took a shot at the show too, saying he wanted America to, quote, look a lot more like the Waltons and a lot less like The Simpsons. First Lady Barbara Bush called the show the dumbest thing she'd ever seen. Again, this all seems very old-fashioned now, but Bart's slightly more edgy Dennis the Menace shtick really did ruffle some feathers back in the day, especially since the idea that animated shows were exclusively for kids was kind of taken as a given for a lot of people in the early 90s. But as these kinds of media wars so often do, it just added fuel to The Simpsons' fire and really boosted its popularity and its place at the center of pop culture for a few years. While it's hard to pinpoint exactly why the initial marketing for The Simpsons was so Bart heavy, other than he was the right character at the right time, my personal theory comes from a story that I've heard a few times about the initial screenings of the show to the writers and the people at Fox. The first episode they made was Some Enchanted Evening, and it went over like a lead balloon. The animation was off, the pace was sluggish, and it seemed like the big gamble that Fox took on the show was not going to pay off. They moved that episode to the tail end of the season to give the writers and animators time to fix it, but the second episode they made, Bart the Genius, obviously a very Bart-centric episode, was a hit with just about everyone, with the Fox people especially being happy with it, perhaps cementing Bart as the true lead in executives' minds. So that could be part of it, but the Butterfingers campaign was being planned even before those screenings. In fact, the marketing machine for The Simpsons kicked in so early in the process that it's likely that an earlier version of Bart's character model, complete with a blue or green shirt that wouldn't make it to air, was what was given to the advertising people. This Butterfinger Bart is actually how many met the character and the then unnamed Milhouse for the first time, thanks to the Butterfinger ad starting in 1988, while the show itself didn't premiere until the tail end of '89. And that blue or green shirt was all over the initial wave of Bart Mania, from the official t-shirts to video games like the Game Boy's Bart vs. the Juggernauts and the excellent The Simpsons arcade game. Though there were also early Butterfinger ads where he was in his correct orange shirt, so I don't really know the story behind this. I'd love to get the full scoop at some point. The rumors that this version of Bart was created so Fox could spot unofficial merch easily is, as far as I can tell, completely made up. But I will say that I almost consider blue and green shirt Bart to be his own distinct character, separate from the Bart Simpson that viewers would come to know and love over the course of the show. The Butterfinger commercials, I think, definitely have their retro charm, but the Bart in them, in all his shameless, catchphrase spouting glory, is exactly the style of writing for the character that The Simpsons writers would kind of become really wary of as the show went on. And that's the endlessly merchandisable Bart that would grace t-shirts and landline telephones for years, long after the Bart of the show had left most of those catchphrase gimmicks behind him. That's not to say that the early years of the show didn't hew a little closer to that blue shirt Bart, because it definitely did. The first two seasons, especially season 1, feature Bart in his purest form, and a lot of him, as he's far more prominent than Marge in these early seasons. His merchandise catchphrases are all present and accounted for. Eat my shorts, I caramba, I'm Bart Simpson, who the hell are you? They even sneak in a cowabunga or two, despite season 11's Behind the Laughter having Bart claim that he never said that in his life. I think those first two seasons are really charming and do feature some great episodes, including one of Lisa's best ever episodes, Lisa's Substitute. And while I don't want to undersell the character of Bart in those early years, he does have some good episodes in season 2. I don't think he truly transcended being the 1989 Dennis the Menace until season 3, which lined up a murderer's row of episodes for him, like Radio Bart, Bart the Lover, and the truly great Bart the Murderer, which introduced Fat Tony and had some of the best Phil Hartman, Lionel Hutz stuff that the show would ever do. And I think season 2, and especially season 3, were helped by tamping down Homer's anger and aggression a bit. Angry Homer can be funny, but I think most will agree that it's not until they gave the character more of a lovable golden retriever quality that he really took off, and his relationship with Bart got a lot less one note. I would call season 3 the last season where you can still feel the traces of Bart Mania. The last one where it felt like the writers thought they had a duty to constantly put Bart at the very forefront of episodes because of how much the world had fallen in love with him. And it produced some good stuff. Season 3 isn't the show's peak, but I think it's this kind of nice middle ground transitional period from the more simple Bart and Homer centric early years to season 4, which does a lot of great stuff to build up Marge as more of a character and widens the show's scope farther and farther out to a lot more of the citizens of Springfield. By season 5, Bart Mania was far in the rearview mirror, and one of Bart's best episodes helps tell us why. In the iconic Bart Gets Famous, we see Bart become a celebrity, famous for spontaneously saying, "I didn't do it" on Krusty's show. The world cannot get enough of it, and pretty soon, well, come on, you know the scene. Probably like most Simpsons fans, I love this episode. It's the show's ultimate statement on Bart Mania and sitcom catchphrases, the shallowness of it, and how it could take something that was fleetingly fresh and funny and grind it down into something repetitive that they felt obligated, or were maybe obligated due to pressure from Fox, to keep on using. But the episode works really well outside of that sitcom critique context too. I think it's actually aged super well in the online culture of the past 15 years or so, where a mildly funny viral video can create an influencer desperate to keep cashing in on the same thing for years. Since Bart Gets Famous, and honestly sometimes even before that, as early as season 2, Bart's catchphrases tended to get invoked ironically with a twist, rather than being something he shouts for an easy laugh. And while Bart's role in the show may have diminished a bit from those early years as Homer and Marge's relationship and the wider cast gained more ground, the golden age of The Simpsons still gave us plenty of amazing Bart moments and episodes. Honestly, despite him famously being the, rude skater kid, my favorite Bart episode is also one of the most heartfelt. Season 7's Marge Be Not Proud, where Bart is riddled with guilt after getting caught shoplifting a video game and letting his mom down. It's not all gooey and sentimental, and this episode has plenty of really sharp gags, but it shows what The Simpsons did at its best, that something like Family Guy can just never approach. Simultaneously tell really cartoonish stories with its massive cast of eccentrics and weirdos, and very grounded, relatable ones that put some real thought into its characters and their family dynamics. I think Bart was at its best after the gimmicks, when he became a really important part of that. And as the Bart Mania fad gradually died down, as it was always going to after a year or two, The Simpsons was able to gracefully outlast it. The Simpsons may be eternal, but that doesn't mean the way we buy our coffee should be. Thankfully, Trade is a coffee service that makes it simple to discover new coffees from over 55 top independent roasters, enabling you to make your best cup of coffee at home every single day. Whatever your taste in coffee happens to be, Trade will curate it just for you. I've had a few more of their red bags show up recently, and the one I really latched onto was the medium roast from Make Coffee Do Stuff. The notes of Swiss chocolate in this are just perfect, and I'm going to be adjusting my plan to include it more often, which is no problem because Trade is super easy. They have free shipping, anytime cancellation, and fully customizable plans, just totally hassle-free. So why not upgrade your morning routine with better coffee? Right now, Trade is offering my viewers a free bag of coffee with any subscription at drinktrade.com/captainmidnight. That's drinktrade.com/captainmidnight for a free bag of coffee with any subscription purchase.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes.